Have you ever heard of Adonijah, the son of David who dared to challenge his own father for the throne of Israel? The story of David's family is marked by intrigues, betrayals, and tragedies, and Adonijah is no exception. Imagine a prince who, driven by ambition, decides to claim something that does not belong to him. But who was Adonijah? Was he truly an evil person? Was he treated unfairly? Was what he did so severe that it justified his death? In this video, you will discover everything the Bible teaches us about Adonijah, the son of David. Did he deserve the fate he met? And what do his actions reveal about the cost of disobedience and unbridled ambition? Get ready to understand one of the most intriguing narratives in the Bible and uncover what really happened to this son of David and his tragic end. As we know, Adonijah was one of David's sons. He was born in Hebron, and his mother was Haggith, one of David's wives. This means that Adonijah was part of the group of David's children born before he reigned over a unified kingdom in Israel. At that time, there was still a conflict between David, who ruled over Judah from Hebron, and Ishbosheth, Saul's heir prince, who governed the other tribes. It was only after the death of Ishbosheth that David began to reign over all of Israel, left Hebron, conquered Jerusalem from the Jebusites, and made it his political and religious capital. Adonijah was the fourth of David's 6 sons born in Hebron. The other children of David, including Solomon, were born after David began to reign in Jerusalem. Adonijah's story is marked in the Bible by his attempt to take the throne of Israel in place of his father. The name Adonijah means, "My Lord is Yahweh," and was relatively common at the time. Other characters in the Bible also had this name. For example, a Levite named Adonijah helped teach the word of God during Jehoshaphat's reign, and after the exile, a Jew named Adonijah was one of those who signed a covenant in Ezra's time. However, these Adonijahs are unrelated to the prince who tried to conspire for Israel's throne. The Bible does not give many details about Adonijah's mother and also does not say much about him before his attempt to take the throne of Israel. Adonijah's story begins to gain prominence when David was already very old and frail. It was during this time that Adonijah, being the eldest surviving son, decided that he would take the throne in place of his father. The biblical text describes Adonijah as a handsome man and mentions that David, as his father, never disciplined him. In 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 6, we see this characteristic of David. The author makes it clear that he had never reprimanded or confronted Adonijah, which may have contributed to the son's ambitious behavior. Adonijah, determined to become king, began to display his power publicly. He gathered chariots, horsemen, and 50 men to march ahead of him, making his intentions to take the throne clear. Additionally, he secured the support of important figures such as Joab, the commander of the army, and Abiathar, the high priest. However, not everyone agreed with Adonijah's plans. Many influential figures in David's court, such as generals, priests, and warriors loyal to the king, rejected his ambition. Even so, Adonijah did not give up. He organized a grand celebration in En-Rogel, gathering princes and leaders who supported him, but he intentionally excluded those who might oppose him, such as the prophet Nathan, the priest Zadok, Benaiah, and his brother Solomon. The feast was not merely a celebration, but part of his strategy to consolidate support and declare himself king. When Adonijah began executing his plan to take the throne, the prophet Nathan recognized the seriousness of the situation and acted quickly. Along with Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, they went to David, who was already very old and frail, to alert him about the conspiracy and ensure that Solomon, the chosen one of God and David, was officially declared king. Nathan and Bathsheba reminded David of his promise that Solomon would be his successor, appealing for him to take immediate action to prevent Adonijah from consolidating power. David, understanding the urgency, ordered that measures be taken swiftly. He instructed Nathan, the priest Zadok, Benaiah, and his servants to take Solomon on his royal mule, a clear symbol of authority and legitimacy, to Gihon, a spring near Jerusalem. There, Solomon was to be anointed king as a public demonstration that he was the one chosen by God and by David. Following the king's orders, Zadok and Nathan anointed Solomon with sacred oil, confirming his authority before God and the people. After the ceremony, a great celebration filled the city. The people, full of joy, recognized Solomon as their new king. Adonijah was with his allies when he received the news that his half-brother Solomon had been crowned king. As soon as they heard this, Adonijah's supporters fled quickly, leaving him alone. Fearing punishment, Adonijah ran to the altar in the tabernacle, seeking protection. At the time, the altar was considered a sacred place where people who committed unintentional offenses could seek refuge from retaliation. However, Adonijah's attempt to take the throne was not an accidental mistake, but a premeditated act of treason. Despite this, when Solomon learned that Adonijah had sought refuge at the altar, he chose to act with mercy. He declared that as long as Adonijah behaved loyally and did not cause trouble, his life would be spared. After this assurance, Adonijah left the altar and returned to his home. Yet Adonijah had not completely abandoned his ambition for the throne. Shortly after, he revealed his true intentions by making a strategic request. He wanted to marry Abishag, a woman who had cared for King David in his final days. To achieve this, Adonijah went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, asking her to intercede with the king to allow the marriage. Although the request seemed innocent at first glance, Adonijah had ulterior motives. Marrying Abishag, who had been close to David, could strengthen his political position and give him a foundation to challenge Solomon's right to the throne. The major issue was that Abishag, the young Shunammite, had cared for David in his last days. While the Bible makes it clear that David never had an intimate relationship with her, Abishag was considered part of the royal harem. In other words, viewed as one of the king's wives or concubines. At that time, marrying a woman who had been part of a king's harem was a very serious matter, as it was often understood as an attempt to claim the throne or challenge the authority of the reigning king. This is exactly how Solomon interpreted Adonijah's request. When Bathsheba approached him to ask that Abishag be given to Adonijah in marriage, Solomon was angered and questioned his mother, saying, "Why don't you ask for the kingdom for him as well? After all, he is my older brother and still has the support of people like Abiathar and Joab." If Abishag was indeed considered part of the royal harem, it meant that after David's death, she was under Solomon's authority. To the king, Adonijah's request seemed like more than just a simple desire for marriage. He saw it as part of a larger plan to usurp the throne. Allowing this union would be akin to handing the kingdom over to his opponents. To eliminate any threat to his reign, Solomon made a decisive move. He ordered Benaiah to execute Adonijah, putting an end to his attempt to seize power. However, Solomon knew the issue did not end there. Joab, who had been the commander of the army during David's reign, and the priest Abiathar were also influential allies of Adonijah and posed a risk to the new government. Solomon understood that as long as these men remained in positions of power, his authority as king would never be completely secure. Moreover, Joab also needed to be punished, especially for the treacherous murders of Abner and Amasa, two important commanders. Before his death, David himself had recommended that Solomon deal with Joab. Taking the opportunity, Solomon ordered Benaiah, a military rival of Joab, to execute the commander. Additionally, Solomon expelled the priest Abiathar, removing yet another ally of Adonijah. Some may think Solomon was too harsh in dealing with Adonijah, but it is important to understand the context. Adonijah was a usurper, And history shows us that when someone seizes the throne in such a manner, one of the first actions they take is to eliminate any legitimate competitors. This is why Bathsheba had reasons to fear that she and her son Solomon would be treated as traitors if Adonijah became king. In fact, Adonijah himself demonstrated this fear when he learned of Solomon's coronation, which shows that he fully understood the potential consequences of his attempt to seize power. Initially, however, Solomon showed compassion and decided to give Adonijah another chance, even after his attempt to usurp the throne. Solomon made it clear that as long as Adonijah behaved loyally and did not conspire again, his life would be spared. This act demonstrated not only the king's wisdom, but also his desire to govern with justice and mercy, following principles that were pleasing to God. However, Adonijah failed to appreciate this opportunity. He not only maintained his ambition for power, but also continued to act deceitfully, seeking ways to undermine Solomon's reign. Furthermore, by proclaiming himself king earlier, Adonijah had disrespected not only his father David, but also God himself. This act was a direct affront to the divine plan, as the Lord had chosen and revealed Solomon as David's legitimate successor, a fact that was widely known in the court. Adonijah ignored this divine choice, placing his own desires and ambitions above God's will. This was not just an act of political rebellion, but also a spiritual rejection of the purpose God had established for Israel. His attitude demonstrated a lack of genuine repentance and a continued willingness to challenge divine order. It was this combination of disobedience and persistence in his errors that led Solomon to take definitive measures to protect the throne and fulfill God's purposes. It's important to remember that, in that context, rejecting someone chosen and anointed by God as successor to the throne was not merely a political act, but a direct affront to the Lord himself. Solomon was not only the legitimate heir in David's eyes, but also the one chosen by God to continue the promised dynasty, from which, at the appointed time, the Messiah would come. This divine choice carried profound spiritual weight, as David's throne was not just a symbol of human leadership, but also part of God's redemptive plan for all humanity. By proclaiming himself king and challenging the divine purpose, Adonijah was not merely disobeying Solomon or David, but rejecting the will of God. This type of rebellion, especially against a lineage directly chosen by the Lord, was considered a grave spiritual transgression because it placed personal interests above the divine plan. This attitude revealed a lack of reverence for God and an attempt to interfere with something sacred and eternal. Adonijah's tragic end was not just the consequence of his political actions, but also a reflection of the fulfillment of the prophecy pronounced against David after his sin with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah. God had declared that the sword would never depart from David's house, and this reality is evident in the lives of his children. The episode of Adonijah is another demonstration of how David's sin left deep scars on his family, bringing conflicts, betrayals, and deaths. Moreover, the story of Adonijah is much more than a historical account. It carries a powerful spiritual lesson that transcends generations. His life and destiny show us the danger of acting with pride and disobedience, ignoring God's sovereignty and plans. Adonijah not only tried to seize the throne out of personal ambition, but also directly challenged the divine choice, demonstrating a lack of humility and submission to God's will. This episode serves as a clear warning that when someone decides to challenge God's purposes, they are not only risking their own life, but also threatening the balance of something much greater, established by the Lord for the good of his people. Adonijah attempted to place his desires above the divine will, but his death revealed the seriousness with which God acts to protect his sovereign plan. Furthermore, Adonijah's fate reflects the inevitable consequence of resisting God's authority. His story is a reminder that disobedience, coupled with pride and ambition, not only leads to personal destruction, but also harms those around. In Adonijah's case, his conspiracy brought conflict and instability to David's family and the entire kingdom of Israel. However, God is faithful to his promises. Even amid tragedy and chaos, he protects what he has planned, ensuring that his will is fulfilled. Adonijah's death was not just an act of justice against his rebellion, but also a marker that reaffirms that God's plans cannot be thwarted. His story continues to teach us that it is vital to trust and submit to God's will, for he works toward the fulfillment of a greater purpose that transcends our understanding. It serves as a reminder that obedience to the Lord is not only a wise choice, but also a secure path to harmony with his perfect will. Now write in the comments if you already knew the story of Adonijah in the Bible. Share this teaching with more people, leave a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the upcoming videos. May God bless your life.